geography also affect the location of economic activities. For example, in the Sahel region of Africa, people traditionally herded cattle. Due to climate change and overgrazing, there is less water and grass in the region, so people are moving further south. Another example would be the warming of the earth, which is causing farming activities in the northern hemisphere to move further north. Changes in resources also affect globalization. During the California gold rush, mining towns popped up all along the Sierra Nevada mountains almost overnight. But once the gold ran out, these towns were suddenly deserted. Changes in infrastructure also lead to changes in the location of economic activities. The construction of canals, railroads, and paved roads made it easier to access resources, and these areas attracted new activities. For example, the construction of the Erie Canal in New York State allowed farmers in the Midwest to obtain a new market. They would ship their goods to the Great Lakes, across the Erie Canal, down the Hudson River to the Atlantic Ocean. This allowed farmers to grow wheat and other crops to sell to Eastern consumers. Another great example is the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. This allowed ranchers in Texas to drive their cattle up to Kansas, where they could be placed on railroad cars that were sent to Chicago for processing. Then the beef could be shipped to consumers all along the East Coast. As we discussed, there is an uneven distribution of resources. Different climates, landforms, soils, and minerals create diverse ecosystems. For example, petroleum, one of our most valuable resources, is a key source of energy and is necessary for products from fertilizers to plastics. Many countries have almost no oil, while others, like Saudi Arabia, have an abundance. Human resources are also unevenly distributed. For example, China has a lot of workers who are willing to work for lower wages than their counterparts in more developed countries. In developed countries, strong education gives more experience and training, and we see entrepreneurs organize resources to improve production. These countries can also design new high-tech goods that requires a highly educated workforce and costly equipment. The uneven distribution of both human and natural resources leads to specialization. Each region tends to produce goods based on the productive resources it has available. This allows for regions to produce goods and services that they can make at the lowest cost. We call this comparative advantage. By only making a few types of goods and services, producers in that region become very skilled at making them. They then learn how to make these goods faster and more efficiently. Producers will invest in specialized tools, facilities, and training in order to lower production costs. Since regions rarely produce everything that they need, they rely on trade. Two terms you need to know: export, goods and services from one country that deliver to another country; import, goods from a foreign country that come into a country for use or sale. Ideally, countries want to export more than they import. Japan has very few natural resources. One resource it lacks is oil. It needs fuel for factories, automobiles, electricity, and heating. Saudi Arabia has an abundance of oil, so Japan could sell its products such as cameras and TVs to Saudi Arabia in exchange for oil. Japan obtains the resources it lacks by taking advantage of the resources it has: infrastructure, skilled laborers, and entrepreneurs. In ancient Egypt, there was a surplus of grains and valuable minerals. They would trade wheat and gold with Greece for olives and wine. The Egyptians also traded with the people of the Arabian Peninsula for spices and incense. The Roman Empire also had an extensive trade system. They would export olive oil and wine to North Africa in exchange for wheat. The Romans would also use the Silk Road to trade with China for porcelain and silk, and with India for cotton and spices. Fast forward to the Middle Ages. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, Western Europe saw a disruption in its trade patterns, due to local communities becoming mostly self-sufficient due to the manor systems. In other parts of the world, trade flourished. For example, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, was located on the Black Sea between Europe and Asia. It became the trading center for these two continents, where European goods were exchanged for Chinese silk and Indian spices and incense. In the Middle East, many ports, such as Alexandria and Aden, became centers of trade for goods from India, Africa, and the Middle East. In West Africa, Timbuktu became the center for the gold salt trade. Arab merchants would cross the Sahara Desert to trade salt, horses, and cloth in exchange for slaves and gold. In the Americas, the Mayans traded their salt, obsidian, cacao, and pottery to Guatemala in exchange for turquoise, jade, and bird feathers. As colonies were established in America, and new ocean trade routes to India and China were established around Africa, Mediterranean trade grew less important. These new trade routes enriched European leaders and created a new standard of living in Europe. The Triangle Trade saw merchants trading enslaved people from Africa, gold and silver from Mexico, sugarcane, rice, tobacco, and fur from America, and furniture, clothing, and foodstuffs from Europe. This increase in world trade led to new wars between Britain, Holland, and France. But by the end of the 1700s, Great Britain will emerge as the hegemonic power. During the Industrial Revolution, we saw the rise of steamships, railroads, and the factory system, which all increased the speed and scale of trade. European powers established plantations and mines in their colonies to obtain the raw materials needed for use in their European factories. which created a market for Europe's manufactured goods. Britain established trading posts in China while the U.S. opened trade with Japan. Some countries reacted to this influx of British goods by imposing protective tariffs, which added duties, taxes, to imports and made British goods more expensive. The 20th century world experienced the Great Depression and 2 world wars. Many countries put up high tariffs or quotas as barriers to trade. After World War II, leading countries got together to create rules and organizations to promote world trade. In 1947, the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade was signed by 23 countries to promote world trade and to eliminate trade barriers, which led to the creation of the World Trade Organization in 1995. The WTO oversees trade agreements around the world and represents about 97% of world trade. Several groups of countries have banded together to eliminate tariffs between them. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Association, created free trade zones between Canada, US, and Mexico. The European Union, which we discussed in our political geography unit, allows goods to move freely between member countries. With the lowering of trade barriers and increase in communication and transportation, world trade has greatly increased in pace and scale. Companies are moving production to other countries where the cost of labor is lower, which is called offshoring. Companies are also hiring overseas companies to produce parts or provide services so that they can focus on other business needs. This is called outsourcing. 2 examples. A computer assembled in the US might have parts from China or Mexico. An American customer might call customer service and speak to an English-speaking representative from another country. Information technology, like the internet, opens up trade to more customers. It also allows manufacturers to track their inventory and to predict future needs more easily. Shipping has also seen advances. They now have containerized cargo. Goods are packed onto large truck-like containers and loaded onto the ship. When they reach their port of call, these containers are moved onto the back of trucks or onto railroad cars without needing to be repacked. The benefits and costs of globalization. Benefits. People enjoy goods and services from all over the world. Benefits of greater connectivity. We can now talk to one another via phone, Facebook, email, or Skype. Advances in technology, medicine, and engineering can be spread quickly. Advances in the speed of economic development, the average standards of living are higher than ever before. Costs. Manufacturing has shifted away from countries where labor is more costly. This has caused workers in developed countries to lose their job. For example, Detroit in 1950 was the number 1 in per capita income. By 2012, it was the 2nd poorest major city in the U.S. Workers in newly industrialized countries are forced to work long hours under harsh conditions because these countries don't have the labor laws that developed nations have. Pollution and climate change has increased. Again, those countries do not have the factory laws that are in place in developed nations. Pandemics, diseases that spread across the globe, are spread more quickly. We saw this with the avian flu and H1N1. People have become global citizens, and disease can easily be spread by people traveling on planes. Some elected leaders feel that they have no control over their local economy. A financial crisis in one country leads to others. We saw this with the Great Recession in 2007. Due to practices in the United States, the economy took a downturn, which then affected the European Union, which in turn caused Greece to have an economic issue. Local communities and culture are losing their uniqueness. Fast food and pop music replaces local traditions and customs. For example, take a look at how many countries in the world McDonald's is now in. Talk, where the puppy go?